The sun was still crawling over the ridgeline when Colt Ramsey rode into the valley, dust rising behind his horse like drifting ghosts from yesterday's storms. His silhouette long and sharpened by the dawn, a man carved from miles of solitude and more nights awake than asleep. A cowboy who'd seen beauty in quiet things, like a well-worn saddle or the way the prairie breathed at night, but never expected his life to change the moment he saw a young woman standing by the broken fence behind Murphy's old barn, her hair tangled by the wind, her dress patched in more places than it was whole, and her eyes, God, her eyes, like two frightened lanterns that hadn't fully decided if they should burn or hide. She startled when Colt approached, glancing down, clutching the fabric of her dress as though bracing herself for a blow, but he simply tipped his hat and asked what she was doing alone at the edge of a ranch long abandoned. She hesitated, long enough for a breeze to slip between them, long enough for a bird to cry overhead, and then said in a voice softer than the dust on his boots that she had come searching for work, for a chance, for something she hadn't had in a long time, safety. Colt studied her the way a man studies tracks he's not sure he wants to follow, slow and careful, because something in her posture told him she expected rejection, she expected him to turn away. "I ain't afraid of work," she added, eyes still fixed on the ground. "I can mend fences, feed livestock, clean tack, I know I ain't pretty enough for most folks to look at twice, but I do what I'm told and I don't cause trouble." She said it like a confession, like a wound she'd gotten used to carrying. Colt felt something stir in him, something protective and old-fashioned, something that didn't care about what the world called pretty. He climbed down from his horse, letting his boots meet the earth as gently as a promise, and he approached her with the steadiness of a man who'd rather face a storm than frighten a tender thing. "Your name?" he asked. She swallowed before whispering, "Marley." A name like dusk and forgotten lullabies. He nodded once slowly and said, "All right, Marley, let's see what you can do." For the next hours, he watched her work, watched her lift beams heavier than her frame suggested she could, watched her move with a mixture of fear and determination, watched her flinch whenever he came too close, as though the world had trained her to expect punishment instead of praise. But she never complained, never slowed down, never broke the silence except once, when the sleeve of her dress tore on a rusted nail. She froze, eyes wide, pressing her arm close as though ashamed of the newly exposed skin. Colt stepped forward not to scold, but to hand her his own handkerchief. "You ain't gotta hide," he said, but she shook her head, whispering, "I'm not pretty." The words trembled out of her like they were made of glass. Colt stopped breathing for a heartbeat. Then he said the words that would chase her for the rest of her life. "That's fine, I need honest, not fancy." And in that moment, Marley's expression shifted in a way he wasn't sure he'd ever forget, like the earth had cracked just enough for a little light to escape through. She wasn't healed, not yet, but she was listening. As the day turned to evening, Colt offered her a place in the bunkhouse and a fresh start, and though she hesitated, fear always arguing with hope, she accepted. But neither of them knew that danger had been riding the trail behind her, a man from Marley's past, a man who believed she belonged to him, who would cross any distance to reclaim her. And while Colt was settling his horse and watching the sky blush with sunset, that man stepped into the valley, tracking footprints that led directly to the cowboy who had unknowingly become her shield. Colt didn't see him yet. Marley didn't dare speak of him yet. But the wind carried a warning across the plains that night. Storms come for those learning to stand. The night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket stitched with restless shadows, and Colt Ramsey lay awake longer than usual, the memory of Marley's trembling voice replaying in his mind, that fragile confession. "I'm not pretty," echoing louder than the coyotes outside, because he'd seen enough broken spirits to know hers wasn't born from insecurity, but carved from years of someone else's cruelty. So when dawn stretched her golden fingers across the plains, he was already saddled, already watching the horizon, already sensing that something unseen lurked at the rim of his land. Marley emerged from the bunkhouse quietly, her hair tied back with a piece of twine, her hands folded as though afraid she took up too much space. Colt greeted her with a nod and a plate of breakfast he'd cooked himself, burnt edges and all, and though she blinked in surprise, she accepted it with a whisper of thanks. As they ate in the cool morning air, she confessed pieces of her story in fragments, never the whole picture, only that she'd run, that she'd been promised to a man as part of a deal she never agreed to, that he owned more anger than affection. Colt listened without pressing, because pressing breaks things, but something in his jaw tightened with each detail. When noon came, he had her ride with him out to the far pasture, wanting to teach her the land, the work, the rhythm of the ranch, and for the first time he saw her smile, barely but real, when his horse splashed through the creek and sprayed them both. She apologized instantly, as if joy itself were something she wasn't allowed to have, but Colt just tipped his hat and said, "If water scares you, you'll hate spring." She laughed then, a quick, startled sound, and he felt it settle into him like a warm ember. But quiet peace rarely survives unchanged. As they returned toward the barns, Colt spotted a rider on the southern trail, moving slow, deliberate, tracking the ground like a predator tracing scent. Colt's hand drifted to the rifle horn, instinct sharpening every part of him. Marley saw the rider too, and the color drained from her face so fast Colt felt the shift in the air. "That him?" Colt asked, voice low but steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Fear already answered for her. The rider stopped at the fence line, a scar-faced man with a smirk like barbed wire, calling out with the entitled drawl of someone used to taking. Girl, he shouted, come on now, you had your fun, time to come home. Marley's breath hitched. Colt stepped forward, placing himself between her and the man like it was the most natural thing he'd ever done. She ain't going anywhere with you, he said. The stranger laughed, dismounting with a swagger that made Marley shrink behind Colt's shoulder. She's mine by promise, the man snapped. You ranch folk don't get to decide what's pretty enough to keep. Something in Colt's blood boiled at that. He wasn't a violent man by habit, only by necessity, but some lines weren't meant to be crossed, and calling a woman property was one of them. You heard the lady yesterday, Colt said, voice like steady thunder. She ain't pretty, but she's honest, and that means she stays if she wants to. The stranger's eyes narrowed. You willing to fight over something that plain? Colt didn't flinch. I ain't fighting over something, he replied. I'm standing for someone. The wind paused, the earth seemed to hold its breath, then it began. A quick explosive movement, the stranger reaching for his pistol, but Colt moved faster, drawing with the reflexes of a man who'd lived too many lives in too many dangerous places. He fired a warning shot that shaved the man's belt buckle clean off. Stranger froze, hand hovering inches from his holster. Colt stepped closer, boots firm against the dirt, gaze unbreaking. You ride off, he said, and you don't come back, because if you do, you won't be carrying a gun out next time. Something in the man's bravado finally cracked, fear slipping through like cold rain, and he spat in the dirt before climbing onto his horse and thundering away down the trail. Only when the echo disappeared did Marley's legs buckle. Colt caught her before she hit the ground. You're safe, he murmured. Long as you're here, you're safe. She looked up at him, tears trembling on lashes she didn't believe were beautiful, and whispered, Why would you protect someone like me? Colt brushed the dust from her cheek with the gentleness of a sunrise. Because honesty, he said, is worth more than all the fancy in the world. She stared at him like she was seeing hope for the first time. And as the plane's wind curled around them, carrying the smell of dust and new beginnings, Colt knew something had started, something small, tender, steady, and though storms might still come, he'd stand between her and all of them. The cowboy wasn't saving a damsel. He was giving a broken woman room to heal. And that, more than any gunfight or wild adventure, was the truest story of the West. So folks, if stories like this speak to your heart, if you love tales of grit, courage, and the kind of kindness that still exists out on the open plains, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, because more powerful stories are coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.